and overview out of the way. So good afternoon and welcome to the November 14th Impacts Grant Review Committee meeting. This is a quick reminder that the meeting is being recorded. Thank you, Avery, for starting that. And there will be minutes posted at a later date. I wanted to also remind folks that the chat feature has been turned off so that we capture all discussion as part of the recorded meeting. And to make this run smoothly, please feel free to ask any questions to myself, grant staff, or our co-chairs. My name is Casey Beck, and I am a grant program coordinator at the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission. And today we'll be reviewing several highlights from the OHSU Center for Health Systems Effectiveness Impacts Statewide Evaluation Baseline Report. And we'll also be taking a thorough look into the most recent reported data by grantees via the REDCap database. And there is an agreement amendment request that is up for review and will be requiring action from the GRC, as well as decisions to be made regarding existing funds and future investments. I also want to apologize, I'm a little under the weather today, so I'm sorry if I sound squeaky, but if anyone needs me to repeat anything at any point, let me know. So today's anticipated meeting schedule is shown here, but please note these are all very generous time estimates, as well as the order of events can change depending on whether or not we have quorum. So we're still waiting for a couple of grant review committee members to join to achieve that quorum. And if we don't get that at the start, we might need to change a few of these around just to make sure that we have enough folks to take votes. So with all those caveats in mind, this is what we're looking at today. And I am now going to pause to take roll to see where we're at with that quorum. Oh, you know what? Avery, I'm so sorry to do this to you. Do you mind taking roll today? I realize that I do not have that screen open.
Yes, I can do that.
Thank you.
I apologize if I mispronounce anybody's name. I'm not used to doing that. So we have co-chair Samantha Byers.
I'm here.
Co-chair Ken Sanchagrin.
I'm here.
Okay, Director Jeremiah Stromberg. Okay, Judge Shanti.
Present.
Okay, Liz Weber.
Present.
District Attorney Steve Gunnels.
Present.
Okay. Eric Swallow. Chief Marsha Harnden. Commissioner Claire Hall. Alicia Beamer.
Present.
JC Brubaker.
Present.
Okay, Dr. Brigham. Sheriff Landers.
I'm here.
Dr. Stanfill.
Present.
RJ Navarro. Senator Gelser Bluin. Janie Gullickson. Michelle Mason. Okay, I'll pass it back to you, Casey.
Thanks, Avery. Sorry again for drawing you on the spot, but I appreciate it. I counted 9. Is that the correct number?
Yes.
All right, so we do indeed have quorum and we will proceed as scheduled. Which means first up, we have our agreement amendment request. Wanted to kind of level set here and provide a quick refresher on what that process looks like. So approval from this GRC is needed when the amendment request exceeds 10% of a program's total grant award, or when the amendment request makes a substantive change to a program. Otherwise, requests to reallocate any portion of the grant that's under that 10% threshold may be administratively processed by us as grant staff. Today, we are reviewing one amendment request that actually meets both criteria. So it's a little over that 10% threshold and also has a small substantive change to the programmatic qualities. And so that's why it's here before you today. And then a quick reminder as well on kind of our approval process. There are, although 9 of you are here and present right now, there are a total of 19 members on this committee. So we utilize voice voting, so we don't have to call 19 members' roll names every time a vote happens. What that looks like in practice is staff will articulate the matter that is up for vote. It's basically generated on consensus. I will say something to the effect of, all right, what I'm hearing is this, and I, believe that the decision before you is this. I'll toss it back to you all for any further discussion or back and forth regarding, whether or not I've captured it correctly. And then we'll move forward with asking for any abstentions. So those who choose to abstain for any particular vote need to say so before the ayes are called. I will say, if you choose to abstain from this vote, please say so now, and we will make a note of who those individuals are. We will then proceed with the vote. I will restate whatever matter at hand is there for you all to vote on, and I will proceed to ask for ayes and then nays. And we will make sure that all names and votes are recorded for the purpose of those meeting minutes. Are there any questions on that from GRC members before we go into the fun part, which is just reviewing the agreement amendment request? Okay. So today's agreement amendment request is from the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs. They are asking to reallocate about $53,000 to equipment for the purchase of a vehicle and 1 year of fuel, maintenance, and insurance for their impacts program to cover a very large geographic area and to meet clients where they're at. So they are currently using their personal vehicles and their personal insurance, and we, the impacts grant, are reimbursing for mileage. And if you're familiar with where the Warm Springs reservation is at, it's very large, and it's also a little bit east from here, and therefore gets quite a bit of snow and inclement weather. And so for safety purposes and overall efficiency and, really having an opportunity to meet clients where they're at, they're hoping to purchase a vehicle. It will only be used by the personnel of their impacts grant program, only for impacts clients. But right now, these individuals are traveling up to 400 miles round trip to make sure that individuals that they are giving impacts assistance to are getting to the treatment and the programs and the resources that they need. So that's the first aspect. Second aspect here is reallocating about $46,000 to personnel to hire a full-time administrative specialist to provide, administrative support and management services to the public safety general manager. And this is where that slight programmatic change comes in, because their program will now be administratively housed in the public safety department instead of the behavioral health department. They have had a heck of a time trying to hire individuals under their behavioral health, and they have had vacant positions since about July of 2022. By administratively moving this program into the public safety area, they have 2 folks lined up, a criminal justice planner and a peer support specialist who are ready to do this work. They're already working with this population, and this is what the tribe thinks is best for this program. So these funds are coming from unused funds in housing assistance and contractual services. Obviously, there's a lot of cost savings that's happened because the program has been on this hiatus while the positions have been vacant. But that is where this is at for your consideration. Are there any questions from the grant review committee? And as a reminder, we'll pause for public comment before hopping into the actual action that will be taken on this. But for now, feel free to have a discussion or ask me any questions.
Casey, the only concern I had about it was that the number that they attached to the fuel insurance and maintenance, it's a big number, 25,000. Is that a reasonable number given the miles that they drive?
It was given the miles they drive. Yep. So they had several trips per month that were exceeding 500 round trip miles. And so due to that high mileage, that's why that fuel cost, insurance cost, and general maintenance of vehicle was so high. But thank you for noting that. Janie, welcome.
I'm so sorry I'm late. Thank you.
No worries at all. We're just in the middle of reviewing the agreement amendment request from Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs. And we are currently in discussion or any clarifying questions. Alicia Beamer, I see your hands raised.
Yeah, thanks, Casey. I was wondering, can you remind me, and I'm sorry, I can't remember because I think we've kind of gone back and forth on this, what we've done in the past with vehicles?
Yeah.
And decisions on vehicles? Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate that. So we have historically approved vehicles. I believe off the top of my head, there are 4 total vehicles that have been approved to date. Most recently, 2 for Umatilla and Morrow counties. For this exact same thing, that client service, the inaccessibility of using personal cars to transport individuals, insurance, that sort of thing. And is there anything I'm missing or like in terms of historical context that you wanted to touch on?
No, Casey, I think you've done a good job. I mean, I think this
Okay.
is very much in line with what we've approved for some other grantees, especially other tribal grantees, especially given their geographic concerns and challenges. And so I think that, no, I think you're doing a great job. Thanks.
All right. I'm not seeing any other hands. And Alicia, thanks for the nod. So it sounds like we answered that question okay. Let's see. We will go ahead and proceed with public comment then. Quick pause. So anyone who happens to be on this call, whether telephonically or via video conference, now is the time. Should you wish to speak up, please feel free to use the raise hand function or just hop off of mute and say what you'd like. We'll pause here for an opportunity to do that. All right, hearing none. So moving forward, I'll now turn it over to the co-chairs and the rest of the grant review committee for discussion and action. And Avery in the background, if you don't mind just confirming that we still have quorum, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, it looks like we do still have quorum.
Thank you. Well, if there are no questions or further discussion, we'll now proceed to the voting process. So the decision before you today is whether or not you approve the agreement amendment request from the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs that was presented to you just about a couple minutes ago. So here I will go ahead and ask for those who abstain, those in favor, and those who are opposed. Are there any abstentions for this particular vote? Oh, Ken.
Not abstaining. I just wanted to clarify for the committee and just for folks watching that this would be to approve all 3 aspects of Warm Springs. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, just
All
wanted
three
to
aspects that were presented to
clarify
you
there.
today. All right, I'm not seeing any abstentions. Thank you for the clarifying point, Ken. All those in favor of approving the agreement amendment request as presented today in its entirety from Warm Springs, please say aye.
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 All right, and those opposed, please say nay. Okay, well then that unanimously gets approved. Thank you for your time and attention. I am now going to pass the speaking baton over to Stephanie Renfro at the OHSU Center for Health Systems Effectiveness. And she's here today to provide us with some really exciting highlights from their recently published Impacts Statewide Evaluation Baseline Report. Stephanie, I see you there. So I'm gonna go ahead and pop off camera and I will begin your presentation. Just let me know when to advance.
Will do. Yeah, thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm really happy to be back with you all today. I'm Stephanie Renfro, and as Casey said, I'm with the Center for Health Systems Effectiveness at OHSU. You can go to the next slide, Casey. So I'm going to start today by reminding you what the role of my center is on impacts. You may remember, for those of you here in August, my colleague Erica and I were here and we shared some preliminary results from the Impacts Baseline Report. And now that that report has been published, I'm back to build upon those initial teasers and talk about next steps for the statewide evaluation. Next slide, please. So the Center for Health Systems Effectiveness is a research shop at OHSU. We're often contracted by state agencies to perform independent evaluation of new programs and policies. And in the context of impacts, our role is to provide statewide evaluation. That is in contrast to the local evaluation and TA work that's being done by the OHSU PSU School of Public Health, who you'll hear from after me. Our evaluation work is quantitative in nature. It uses administrative data sources and statistical analyses, although we will incorporate qualitative findings from the School of Public Health local grantee work, and that will help to provide context for what we're observing in the quantitative data. Next slide, please. So our evaluation work includes all the data sources that you see here, and these data are linked at the person level, which gives us a really rich understanding of how individuals interact with the criminal justice and health systems over time. And you can advance, Casey. As I know this group is well familiar, Impacts launched in the summer of 2020, and it's currently on the second of its 2-year grant cycles with a third cycle anticipated. And then you can advance it once more, Casey. The purpose of our baseline report was to describe the impacts target population, their criminal justice and health service patterns, and the policy context surrounding the behavioral health and criminal justice landscape just prior to the start of impacts. So for this baseline report, we elected to focus on 2018 and 2019, the years that you see highlighted here in green. Those gave us clean calendar years. They also avoided the first few months of 2020, which, as we all know, saw some pretty major disruptions. And so with this context, I'm going to move into an overview of our baseline results. And you'll notice with the amount of time I have today, I can really only skim the surface. It might feel a little bit fast, but I invite any and all discussion. What calls out to you? What would you have wanted to know more about? I definitely welcome you to read the full report. If you could advance, Casey. So I'll start by characterizing the target population. We didn't see major differences between 2018 and 2019. So for simplicity, the next few slides, it will all be 2018 results. And we know that there's variety in how impacts grantees are defining and identifying their target population members. For the purposes of this evaluation, we define the target population as you see here. It includes anybody who meets any of the following criteria in 6 months. I'm going to pause because I see a hand raised. I'm happy to take a question.
Judge Shanti, was that you that had a question?
I'm sorry, I had my mic off. Do you want us to are you going to save time at the end for questions, or do you want us to ask questions during the time that you're talking about the particular thing we have a question about?
Either's fine, but I am happy to be interrupted. Yeah, let's hear it now if you've got one.
Okay, well, I'll give you my question, but you can tell me that, can we talk about that later?
Okay.
When I read the whole report, I was interested to see that the target population is 2 or more ED visits and or hospitalization for behavioral health or any of the other following. So how is the 2 or more ED visits or hospitalizations for behavioral health connected to the intersection between behavioral health and the criminal justice system? Because I would assume that there can be ED visits with people that have nothing to do with the criminal justice system, never did and never will.
Yep. No, that's a great question. So the target population criteria that we've been using have been informed by what we've been hearing through the qualitative interviews with the impacts grantees. And some of those criteria are focusing on individuals with high healthcare utilization and behavioral health needs. It could be that just because we know that there's an association between behavioral health conditions and the likelihood of being involved in the criminal justice system, it could be that that's informing it. I welcome CJC or anyone else to chime in. These target population criteria, they can be refined over time too. So if we decide that we really need there to be that very clear connection in the administrative data, that's certainly an adjustment that we can make.
Well, because from my perspective, and and I'm just one person, this whole thing started with respect to the intersection between behavioral health and the criminal justice system, which is quite different than other things that are going on in the state that are focusing on only on behavioral health. Because the people that are in our target population under the statute are people that have interactions with the criminal justice system and that there's some connection there. And so my concern is if we use this as a target population, then when we go down into the report and we see actually the highest utilizers are the people that go in for behavioral health reasons. And that tells us nothing about their connection to the criminal justice system. I do understand we've got upstream, you might want to improve the behavioral health system so that you get upstream. But in terms of qualitative data to find out if this is actually interrupting the cycle of interaction with the criminal justice system, I fear, and I could be totally wrong, but I fear that having such a big chunk of the target population based on the numbers that you've provided in this nice report you have here, that we don't have any way of telling if they had any law enforcement contact, if they've got any criminal record. I mean, it looks to me like it's quite small, the connection between the criminal filings and the probation and parole. So that has me very worried that we've gone off a spur road that is not what this impact statute was designed to do. So, and I might be raising an alarm for no reason. I just wanted to highlight it.
No, I appreciate the comments so much. And I appreciate your reading the reports. It looks like Alicia Beamer might have more to say on this.
Yeah, I appreciate what Judge Shante is saying. I think when we started this, it was both, right? It was high utilizers of the healthcare system and the court system. So the 2 or more ED visits from a hospital perspective makes quite a bit of sense, especially because that's the most expensive place for folks to receive care that may be able to receive care in alternative settings. And we do, I can just speak from our experience, and we have quite a bit of data on this. The high utilizers of the ED, the highest utilizers, we are seeing an intersection with them interfacing with the judicial system. So it makes sense, but I think when we started, it was and both of them, not one or the other, because I agree that if it's just 2 or more ED visits independently of the others, that would be a challenge to track. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Judge Chauncey. It looks like your hand's back up. I'd love to hear what you say, and then I'm thinking just to keep us on track, maybe I should keep going, and if there's time at the end, Casey, maybe we could reserve it for some more conversation.
I'm trying to undo my hand, so
Oh,
okay. I can't figure out how to
Good.
undo it. I agree with what Alicia said. It was and I also agree with her that there is some connection. I'm just worried about how to track this. And we could go really off task if we start capturing all these people that have never had any connection with the criminal justice system.
No, thank you. I really thank you for raising that. And I've got it in my notes here. If there is more time this meeting, we can talk about it. And I can tell you, we've been working with the CJC too. And there are a few places where we've talked about maybe wanting to refine this. So this is definitely one we can talk more about. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to continue. So for currently, our target population definition includes anyone with 2 or more ED visits or hospitalizations in 6 months. And those are for behavioral health. 2 or more circuit court filings and a behavioral health condition, individuals who are released from community supervision or currently on parole or probation, and a behavioral health condition, or discharge from the state hospital. And if you could advance it, please. Thank you. So what you can see here is that in 2018, almost 10,500 individuals met the target population criteria. Over half of those were based on the ED visits and hospitalizations criterion. A third had 2 or more circuit court filings. A fifth were released from community supervision or on parole or probation. And 5% were discharged from the Oregon State Hospital. If you quickly do the math, you'll see that those percentages in the right-hand column sum to more than 100%. And that's because some people met multiple criteria, which you can see from the next slide. If you'd advance, Casey. Thanks. So here we have the 10 most common ways that people qualified for the target population. As Judge Chauncey said, the most common that you'll see here is people meeting those ED visits and hospitalization criteria, followed by circuit court filings and community supervision. And starting with that 4th bar, you begin to see combinations of criteria show up. So the first one, court filings and entering community supervision, and so on. If you could advance the slides. We know that a key component of impacts entails providing behavioral health supports. And this table takes a look at specific conditions and how prevalent they were within the impacts target population and some comparison populations. And so to orient you a bit to the table and to those comparison groups, our first column of results is for people who meet the target population criteria and reside in impact service areas. The middle column or second column are any members of the Oregon Health Plan residing in impact service areas. And then that third column is members of the Oregon Health Plan statewide. And so as expected, you can see that the prevalence of behavioral health conditions is much greater in our target population than the general population. In the interest of time, I won't ask you to absorb too much more today. You can sit with these with the full report. This is also a truncated list of conditions. There are several more that are included in the full report. If you go to the next slide, Casey. This chart illustrates the proportion of the target population with co-occurring behavioral health conditions. And so you'll see here that only 11% of individuals were identified with a single behavioral health disorder. Over half of them had 5 or more diagnosed conditions. Over a quarter had 8 or more diagnosed conditions. And so this really just goes to underscore the health complexity of the individuals that are being served by impacts programs. You advance again, please, Casey. So now we'll move from characterizing the target population into the ways that these individuals interacted with the criminal justice and health systems just prior to impacts launching. Thanks, Casey. So on the criminal justice side, you can see that the majority of target population individuals that had any convictions had multiple convictions. And as a reminder, 2 or more convictions was one of the qualifying criteria to be in the target population. And so that's why you kind of see that peak there. Many of those qualifying then had more than 2. And there's about 1,500 members who had just a single conviction. And so these would be people who wouldn't have been identified on the basis of convictions alone, but maybe these were folks who had ED or hospital visits and so were identified and then also had a conviction related. All right, if you could advance to the next slide. Out of individuals with convictions, we looked at their most serious offense and found them to be almost evenly split between misdemeanors and felonies. Generally speaking, these were higher level misdemeanors, so class A, and lower level felonies. And this is a good moment actually to underscore the importance that, or the importance of factoring in external policy changes when we move to evaluation. In 2020, voters passed ballot measure 110, which affects how drug offenses are classified. And so that would be a sort of change where we would expect this distribution to change over time. And I'll come back to this point when I talk about the importance of comparison populations in the statewide evaluation. If you could advance again, please, Casey. Thanks. I shared this image at the last meeting, but this chart illustrates how individuals convicted in 2018 interacted with the criminal justice system during the 4 quarters of 2019. And so you'll see here, nearly a third had no further criminal justice interaction in 2019. That's that top kind of periwinkle lane. About half were under community supervision by the end of the year. That's that green lane near the bottom. And there's a lot of movement between the different levels. Since 2 of IMPACT's primary aims are to reduce recidivism and institutional placements, we might expect that this flowchart would look different over time. So we might see less contact with the more severe levels of criminal justice involvement. We might see less churn between levels. And then we'll transition, if you can move forward a slide, to healthcare utilization. So once again, we compared the target population individuals residing in IMPACT service areas to the general Medicaid population in IMPACT service areas and statewide. This first table that you're looking at shows the average count of visits or inpatient days an individual has during a year. And perhaps unsurprisingly, there's a lot higher utilization among the target population than general Medicaid. For example, if we look down at the inpatient days results, we see that target population members averaged about a week in the hospital in a given year, compared to less than a day among the general Medicaid population. You can also see that the majority of those hospital days spent by target population members were related to behavioral health. And if you advance, please. We also examined behavioral health services in the outpatient setting, and we saw smaller differences between the 3 groups. However, some of the rates that you'll see reveal opportunities for improvement across the board in getting people needed supports and services. Oh, we might have lost the slide. Thanks, Casey. So to call out just a few findings, I know there's a lot here, but only about 2/3 of individuals discharged from a hospital stay for mental illness received outpatient follow-up within 7 days. That's that first row that you see. Going down a few more rows, only about 1/4 of individuals experiencing new episodes of depression are receiving ongoing medication management. Down in the last few rows, you can see that substance use treatment rates were kind of just low across the board. We know that there are a number of IMPACTS programs that are focusing on increasing coordination and capacity for behavioral health treatments. And so our evaluation can help assess whether we see any of these numbers move as a result. Right, advance please, Casey. Thanks. So finally, the baseline report offered a look at state hospital commitments. This snapshot that you're seeing here shows the distribution of commitment types among discharges in 2019. We know that there's been a lot of news coverage around persistent capacity issues at the state hospital and long wait times for admission. There's a federal court order that reinforced limits on both wait periods and total length of stay. And between those items and just focused attention on increasing outpatient behavioral health supports, it'll be important to track these kinds of compositional changes in commitment rates and typologies over time. And then one more display for you. If you could advance, Casey, thanks. So this looks simple on the surface. I think I shared this with you last time too, but this shows our ability to track outcomes for individuals with contact in one sector, in this case, discharging from the state hospital, and to see what happens next. So in the year following the discharge from the state hospital, more than half of individuals in the target population appeared in the ED. Over a quarter had a hospital stay. 14% had a conviction or entered community correction supervision, and almost a quarter were readmitted to the state hospital. And so if I could just kind of emphasize that the only way we're able to look at these outcomes and see them related to each other in this way is because of the access to the administrative data that we have and our ability to link those data sets. If you could advance, Casey. So the question that that this group and legislators would want answered is, did impacts work? If you could do the next slide. By did it work, we mean, did it meet its stated goals of reducing criminal justice system involvement and high intensity healthcare utilization and institutional placements? So with a formal evaluation effort, what we would do is turn each of these goals into hypotheses. If you could do the next slide, Casey. Thanks. So here they are written as hypotheses that we can test using statistics. We took the liberty of proposing a fourth hypothesis, if you could add that, Casey, given the specific focus on community behavioral health services. So we hypothesize, in addition to the three stated goals, that impacts would increase mental health and substance use disorder treatment rates. And then for each hypothesis, if you could advance, thanks. We identify a range of metrics that, taken collectively, can give us some idea of where we see program effects. What you're looking at here isn't a complete list. I didn't want to make the font super, super, super small. And we also plan to refine and add metrics through more conversations with CJC and stakeholders. Again, sincerely welcome recommendations from you all around what the most relevant outcomes are. Okay, if you could advance, please. Thanks. So the really key component of statewide evaluation is the fact that it is statewide evaluation. What you see here in blue are the impacts regions, but if you could advance again, the administrative data that we have access to covers the full state of Oregon, right? So we have all the non-impacts regions as well. And so these regions can serve as a comparison group for assessing all the outcomes that I just showed you. The reason that this is key is that at the same time that impacts has been in effect, we've had a number of shocks to the system. I mentioned ballot measure 110. I mentioned the Mossman order around state hospital wait times and lengths of stay. COVID happened during impacts. So measuring the same outcomes that we're interested in for a comparison group who experience these same shocks is the way that we're able to help tease out which changes over time are due to those external factors and which ones can be reasonably attributed to the impacts programs. If you could advance. Okay, so where are we now? So we have completed the baseline reports. I think that has been sent to you all, and it's up or going to be up on CJC's website. So that groundwork is laid. Agencies are ready to provide the next round of data. And if you could advance again, Casey. Contingent on funding allocations, what we would do next is move right into statewide evaluation of the first grant cycle. So we're late enough that administrative data is ready to go. We would conduct subsequent evaluations for future grant cycles, since it's typical that programs mature and evolve over time. Sometimes program effects look kind of small after the first year or two, and then you see those programs mature and the effectiveness really take hold. And so that would be the plan. My next slide is just a question slide. I'm happy to, if there's time, take any additional questions, any thoughts or musings or suggestions if this next evaluation phase does happen. And thanks a lot for the opportunity.
Thanks,
I
Stephanie.
see at least one. Yes.
We definitely have about 5 minutes for questions, so plenty of time.
Great. Okay. I see there's a hand raised. I didn't see who it was.
It's me.
Yes.
Ashanti. All right, so I at the risk of beating a dead horse, and I really appreciate your openness to my questions about this. So I understand I'm seeing this through a particular lens, which is I'm a judge, and so I consider the impacts grant to be directed at what I consider to be my people, right? So, and what I see happening in Oregon with all the money that came through, thankfully, is that our people are getting lost because what's happening is funding is going into behavioral health, which is great. I'm totally in favor of it. Don't get me wrong about that. And the assumption is that the behavioral health addition is going to actually filter into our people. And it may or may not, because our people are different. You know, my sister-in-law has psychosis. She's had it her whole life. She's 70 years old, and she has never had one contact with police. She's just fine on that score. So our people are people that have behavioral health issues, a lot of them, substance use disorders, and then they have also what we call criminogenic needs, which are a whole bunch of things that are considered as contributing to their criminal behavior. And by the way, behavioral health issues are mental illness is not a criminogenic need. But the reason that this impact grant focus was so important is because we are trying to capture these high utilizers that law enforcement continually has contact with. And so if for instance, you laid out your, what are we going to test? We're going to test if there was a reduction of behavioral health use. Well, that would be fine if this program was a behavioral, let's find out what we can do to reduce behavioral health use of the ED or the state hospital. I mean, the state hospital, we can just assume that almost everyone there is on aid and assist. So that, and your numbers actually point that out. So it's really, to me, important that we don't divorce the criminal behavior or police contact type of connection, that intersection, from the outcomes that we're trying to study. What we're trying to see is if these particular people that have that are intersect with the criminal justice system and the behavioral health system, if those people reduce emergency room use, not if just anybody reduces emergency room use. And I'm a stickler on that because we've got more and more programs that are expansive to just behavioral health generally. And what I consider my population, my people, are being left out. So that's just my, again, ringing the bell of please let's pay attention to our people. Thank you.
No, I appreciate that. And I was typing away and realized I wasn't on mute. So sorry if that was distracting. I welcome, and I'll say again, it's not too late. This is perfect feedback at this time. We haven't done the statewide evaluation yet. So this is perfect. It looks like Janie Gullickson, you have your hand up.
Thank you. Found my mute button. Thanks for that presentation and for your work on that. And I hope I didn't miss something that you shared already, but my question is in relation to the mention of Measure 110 reducing possession of small amounts of drugs to a citation or infraction. And so I'm wondering if, because the impacts grants have been and programs have been in place, I mean, I think it feels like we've been doing this for years. So before Measure 110 was implemented, is there data on the amount of convictions or charges or arrests on the folks that are our priority population versus after the implementation of 110 and maybe the citations they received or that aren't criminal convictions? Is that something that's tracked that we could compare?
So we haven't done that yet as part of our work. I know that, I've seen some statistics and articles and stuff. I wonder if CJC actually has more to say about that. I know there have been some observed expected compositional changes. Do any CJC staff want to speak up?
Oh, you can go ahead, Ken.
Well, yeah, and sorry, Janie, I just want to make sure. So what you're asking is, at least in the work we're doing for impacts, are we looking at kind of a pre and post 110 simply based on the timing of the grants that we've put out, and like, have we seen anything? Is that the question?
Yeah, because it seems to intersect. I mean, that if that's a component that had an effect or shock to the system, or how, you know, what the wording that you used. I am curious, for our folks that were the priority population we are aiming to serve, were those possession convictions part of the making a person a priority population? Was that one of the convictions that we counted, or was it any conviction? And then if there's a reduction in those convictions, were there citations given, or was it that there was, like, they got connected to services, whether it was a result of our impacts programming or funded programs or not? I hope I'm asking.
No, I think so. I just wanted to make sure I was hearing you correctly. And I think, you know, Stephanie's initial answer is kind of the one where we're at right now. This is really the pre. And so those convictions, those arrests, those interactions with the criminal justice system would be baked in. And I think part of what Stephanie was trying to say, though hopefully I don't put words in your mouth, correct me if I'm wrong, is that as we move forward now, we're probably going to see, no matter what, a natural dip, whether that be for COVID,
Sure.
Measure 110, the combination of both. I mean, I think it coincides perfectly with some of the struggles some of our grantees faced even when COVID first impacted, you know, jail usage and everything else, to where our actual definition of the target population has to evolve a little bit, and we should expect to see some reductions. But then after we, to the best we can, you know, methodologically kind of account for those reductions, then we can begin to see as we move forward what that impact is. I will say that we do have some connections at CJC into the e-violation data. So I think that's something we can talk to Stephanie and her team about, like whether there's an opportunity to combine those in. And so we can maybe see what some of those outcomes would be for anybody who falls in our target population. But certainly that's the next step. I think that Stephanie's even suggesting that, like, hopefully if we want to move forward with continuing to do this secondary data work, that's the type of questions that they're tough as nails to answer because of all the things happening, but just that they're the ones that we might be able to at least have some thoughts on, because we do have some of the data there. So I'd hopefully say more to come, assuming that, you know, the GRC sees value in continuing some of this work.
Thank you both. That was helpful.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question, and Ken, thank you for the perfect answer.
Well, thank you, Stephanie, for the amazing presentation. I'm going ahead and sharing my screen once more, and we'll be tossing it over to Sarah Rayner.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Sarah Rayner. It's nice to see you all. I'm here today representing Dr. Waddell's group from the OHSU PSU School of Public Health, and I'm here today to share client data that's been submitted by Oregon Impacts grantees. The data that you're going to preview today represents Impacts clients who were active between July 1st and September 30th of this year. I have about 12 slides to get through, so I'm happy to take questions, but I'm going to request that we take them at the end, and we can go to the next slide, Casey. And excuse my voice as well. I also have a cold, so let me know if you need me to repeat anything. A little background about the Impacts database. You all saw me at the last GRC meeting where I shared a very, very quick preview of the interface that grantees are now using to report client level information. So as of July 1st of this year, grantees began entering data for their active Impacts clients into the database. This marked a pretty significant shift from quarterly reporting of aggregate numbers to a live client level database. Through this change, we are hoping to increase our collective understanding of client eligibility criteria, who's in the program, why are they in the program, the scope of the services that are being provided, client engagement over time, and eventually the impact of the program. We are still working very closely with grantees towards getting complete data, and I just wanted to say kudos to all of the grantees. They're doing an incredible job with this transition to using the database. Next slide. So as I noted, we're working very closely to support the grantees, and just wanted to note, again, I know I've repeated this, I'm repeating this from the last meeting, but our role at the OHSU PSU School of Public Health in overseeing the impacts database is pretty comprehensive. We are managing database account operations. We're the key point of contact for support, doing new training for staff, onboarding for staff at all the grantee sites, and offering continued support through all those different modalities. We're also doing regular data quality checks, especially as it gets up and running. We're collecting continuous feedback from grantees and from stakeholders at CJC, Stephanie's team at CHSC, and from you all as well through the future to continue to improve the database. And of course, analyzing the data and sharing out key findings, which today is the first preview of. Okay, next slide. So this slide shows age groupings and sex among active impacts clients between July 1st and September 30th of this year. So you can see there for the age grouping figure, there's a total of 399 active clients entered into the database for that time range, July through September. You'll see some variation in the total number for different figures, and that's really just due to unverified or missing data points. But what you can see for age groups is about 18% of impacts clients were in the 30 to 34 age range, 18% in the 35 to 39, and 15% in the 40 to 44. In the pie chart to the right, mostly male, 64% of impacts clients were male during that time frame, and 35% female. Next slide. One more demographic point that we wanted to highlight and share is that 63% of clients were white and 34% American Indian or Alaska Native. So definitely reflects the reach that tribal grantees are having into their tribes and communities, and we thought it was very important to share this. Next slide. So we mostly wanted to focus on some of the new data points that we have. We are asking, all the same questions that CJC previously had in aggregate form and more. So this is a new data point from grantees, and it shows referral pathways into the impacts program. This is how grantees identified or connected with their clients, and you can see 28% are coming into the impacts program through jails, 22% through community corrections, 15% through behavioral health program referrals. It's followed by walk-ins, community outreach, and law enforcement drop-offs or referrals from law enforcement. Next slide. Okay, another new and exciting data point are impacts client encounters with emergency services and criminal justice systems. This table shows encounters that clients had in the year prior to connecting with the impacts program. At the top here, you can see for jails, 67% of the impacts clients, again, between July and September of this year, had at least one encounter with jails. 47% had at least one encounter in the past year with local law enforcement. 35% were on parole and probation in the past year, and 25% had at least one encounter with an emergency department in the past year. Next slide. The last slide showed us that 67% of impacts clients between that July and September timeframe had at least one encounter with a jail in the past year. So this figure to the left shows us the frequency distribution of how many encounters clients had. So we're not just asking if they had any encounter, but we're asking how many encounters. Among the 268 impacts clients, again, between July and September, the mean number of jail bookings was 4. You can see some outliers towards the end of the figure who had a significant amount of jail bookings in the past year, 15, 16, 20, 24, and then those are the smaller bars to the right. And then if you're looking at the taller bars towards the left of the figure, that's kind of where most of the impacts clients fell, between 1 and 5 jail bookings in the past year, again, with a mean of 4. And then the figure to the right shows the number of encounters with local law enforcement in the past year That was 168 impacts clients who connected with the program between July and September of this year. And the mean number of encounters was 5. Next slide. Okay, and I'm flying through these because this is really just a preview. This figure shows mental health and substance use disorders among impacts clients, those who were, again, active between July and September. This is really interesting to see. Having super detailed individual level information, we can actually look at the overlap of mental health and substance use disorders among impacts clients. So that big green part of the pie, you can see 77% of active clients between July and September had a co-occurring mental health and substance use disorder, which is key information to know. Next slide. We are also collecting some information about clients' housing status, including the information that you see in this figure, where we're asking about current living arrangements. Again, this is between July and September. 22% of impacts clients were living in a tent and or outside. 19% were in a private residence, such as their own apartment or home. 17% were in a jail or correctional facility, and 16% were staying with friends, family, or others. Next slide. Okay, so no fancy figure here, but we did want to share some of what we saw when we started to look at program engagement over time. Of the clients who were active in July, 57% came back in August for services, and 50% came back in September for services, which is a huge amount of engagement for this population. Moving ahead, we'll be able to share details about why a person might not have engaged with services. So the last figures I just showed you throughout the presentation weren't really looking at engagement over time, but that's something we'll be able to do moving forward. Next slide. This slide shows the most frequent services provided to clients. You can see 61% of clients received case management services, 46% received peer support or peer outreach, 38% received housing services, 34% received mental health services, and so on. These data here reflect the services provided at baseline, so that first month that they connected with a client, and in the future, we'll be looking at trends over time. Next slide. So on that note, moving ahead, we will report on a whole gamut of things. I won't read this whole list to you, but these are just some examples of what we can look at. And we'll be in close collaboration with CJC and Stephanie's team at CHSE, as well as the grantees to really keep an eye on data quality and completion. So that is all I have to share with the group today. Just a quick preview of the data that we are collecting, and I will pause now and take any questions from the group.
Looks like you do have a question, Sarah.
Hi, Sarah. It's Marsha Harden, the Chief of Police in Albany. Again, thank you for the presentation. I noted this because this is just a drum that I've been beating, since that seems to be our term today, is the 77% have overlapping with both mental health and substance abuse. And it's just something we see every day, and we keep telling our officials, yeah, we have a homeless problem, but we've really got to attack both these two areas, or we're not going to make any impact on the overall issue at all. So I want to thank you for that. And then I'm probably going to call on this presentation a little bit and say, oh, we're not the only ones talking about this, and the importance of spreading both stabilization centers and detox facilities across the state of Oregon. I think is really going to help, because right now, as you said in the previous presentation, is our ED visits and our interactions in the jails, and those are not the appropriate place for these folks. And it just boggles my mind that we don't seem to be able to figure that out just yet, except for everybody on this call. So thank you again for that. It was, it hit home with me.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. The overlap for mental health and substance use was both surprising and not surprising for us to see, but really important to see because we know that the services needed need to be wraparound and really supportive for this population specifically. So thank you. All right, any other thoughts or questions? I see a hand up.
Yeah, it's me, Stacy. I was just curious, is this group that in addition to looking at all of these data points, that we might actually as a group be able to try to promote some deeper system changes, like those numbers of folks with the co-occurring disorders certainly weren't a surprise to me. But what does continue to be a surprise to me is how we don't seem as a state to be moving forward at all to figure out all of those billing processes and credentialing and all of those things to make it so that those two issues can be served at the same time without so much administrative burden and hassle, not just for the individual, but also for the systems that try to serve them. And so some of the data that you've shared today really just supports what we always have been saying, but now we actually have some data to be able to put behind that. And I would, this is the drum I've been beating the last 3 weeks, is really about when is Oregon going to start to move towards actually treating alcohol, A&D issues, substance use issues right alongside, rather than having to go through a whole certification process and billing changes. So I just wanted to say that hopefully this will be able to move some of that forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, the Waddell group that I'm a part of, Dr. Waddell is on the line as well. We have a separate project right now with Oregon Health Authority, and we are taking a deep dive into the co-occurring disorder treatment service landscape for the state of Oregon. And we're seeing all the same things. So we're really excited we're actually releasing that in the next 2 months. And we're happy to share that with this group as well. But as you said, having this data for this project specifically is really interesting and just tells us what we know, and I think can definitely be a point of leverage for advocating for policy changes and helps us take a deeper look at the program and what services are needed.
Great, thank you.
I see another hand up.
Oh, it's me, Judge Shanti. Do we have this report you put on? It's pretty interesting. I didn't see it in my material, so maybe I just overlooked it.
No, so this is going to be something that we are able to pull regularly. We'll be sharing data with CJC monthly, and we're kind of working through our schedule of when we're going to have a more comprehensive report that we send out to a broader audience. So stay tuned, and then happy to get these slides distributed as well so that you have them on hand.
Yeah, I would like to have a copy of the slides, and also to what you just presented goes to what I was bringing up earlier, which is you actually have the data that shows us what police contact, jail, things that aren't in the target population. So it should be possible to assess that and then really connect the criminal justice piece to the going to the ED.
Exactly.
So I'm really stoked about that. We've been trying to get that kind of data for like 10 years, and it's really nice to see that it's happening.
Yeah, and I am also stoked on it, and I know a lot of other people are. And again, like, huge kudos to the grantees, because it's been a big lift for them to take on this amount of data entry, but they are into it, they're engaged, and I've just been really impressed. So
yeah, it's really valuable information. So if CJC could send us the slides, can we get the slides? Great.
Absolutely. Yep. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. That was really exciting stuff. I am going to offer to everyone a short break. So let's get back here at 2:10. So just a little under 5-minute break. Go get, a beverage, use the restroom, whatever you need to do. And then we're going to jump back into the funding discussion. But yeah, a short break. See you back here in just under 5 minutes at 2:10 p.m.
Casey, I have to leave at 3, so if we have a vote and I'm needed for a quorum, I'm sorry, but I have to leave at 3.
Understood. No, thank you so much for being here, Judge Shanti. We appreciate it. I think we are doing okay on quorum.
Very well, thank you.
Alrighty. The time is now 2 p.m., so welcome back from a short break. We are going to dive into impacts funding considerations. And as we do that, I'm first going to provide an overview of the available impacts funding. And then there are 2 action items on the agenda today: a decision on the support of existing data infrastructure and research investments, as well as a decision on future program funding investments. So first, an overview of how much impacts funding is currently available. There was $10 million appropriated to the Impacts Grant Program during the most recent legislative session for use in the 2023 to 2025 biennium. And at least 3% of that 10 million, or $300,000, is statutorily required to support outcome measures and or evaluation. And as you may recall, there's also about 1.4 million that remains unallocated from our previous grant cycle, the funding cycle of 2022. So that brings our grand total here to approximately 11.4 million, so $11,432,028 in total available funding. Again, with at least $300,000 of which statutorily required to go towards outcome measures or supporting evaluation research of some kind. So something to consider is the existing data infrastructure that has been built, as well as the potential for research investments. Firstly, that existing infrastructure. So as Sarah just very recently presented on what that REDCap database has allowed us to see, that, you know, client level data that grantees are reporting, that's what we're talking about here, is that REDCap database, as well as the technical assistance provided from the Oregon Health and Science University, Portland State University School of Public Health, which is specifically the Waddell Research Group, Sarah and Dr. Waddell and their team. So they have developed this REDCap database, which is the Research Electronic Data Capture database. And through that database is how grantees report this client level data. It is stored and hosted at OHSU. And for your consideration really today in terms of how to support this existing infrastructure is to consider an extension of their contract through June 30th of 2026. That would allow them to maintain that database, provide that technical assistance to grantees for data collection and reporting, as well as implement any updates based on quality assessments, grantee feedback, even GRC feedback. They will continue to report on Impact's local evaluation results and conduct qualitative interviews and/or focus groups with grantees. These qualitative interviews and focus groups have been invaluable in providing like what the boots on the ground are actually doing. And, you know, sometimes when you're looking at data and you're in research, the things that make sense for you to collect aren't necessarily what's able to be done in practice. So getting that feedback from folks that are actually doing the work has been really informative for Dr. Waddell's team in having this REDCap database. And lastly, to disseminate the local evaluation report. So just as Judge Shanti was inquiring, like, where can we see more of this? That would be an opportunity. So not only will, you know, through OHSU and their monthly reports to the CJC, which we will, of course, continue to keep you all apprised of quarterly, there will be a local evaluation report that is, you know, distributed to you all and publicly, and, you know, an opportunity to convene grantees for webinars and a local retreat, similarly to the one that we hosted in May. And then also submitting conference and manuscript abstracts. So the total investment for supporting the existing REDCap database infrastructure is $600,000. Are there any questions about this REDCap specific portion, specific to the Waddell Research Group portion, before we go into the, you know, considerations for investments in research and evaluation of impacts like program efficacy? Janie.
I apologize, this is off topic. I have to leave by 2:30, so wondering if there will still be quorum or if quorum will still be needed at 2:30.
Yeah, we do have some action items. Avery, if you don't mind confirming what number we're at. Thank you so much for giving us a heads up, Janie.
Yeah, so right now we have 12 members. So if we lose 2, we will still be at quorum.
Thank you for that. All right. Moving forward then to an additional consideration. So to what extent would the grant review committee like to support, further research and evaluation of impacts program efficacy? So that was, we heard from OHSU CHSE, specifically Stephanie Renfro, earlier this afternoon, and she presented on the baseline report that was completed and, funded for this impacts and pre-impacts time. So they have also proposed future evaluations, not future, excuse me, but other evaluations that would cover grant cycle 1, which was July 1st, 2020 through June 30th, 2022, and grant cycle 2, July 1st, 2022 through June 30th of 2024. And then also a future evaluation, which would cover July 1st, 2024 through June 30th, 2026, possibly this next funding cycle. But the baseline report was published in October of 2023. That's what we heard from Stephanie today. Their statewide evaluation really links all of these administrative data sources that really have not been able to be linked before. It has that comparison group of the impacts service areas versus the non-impact service areas. And as we mentioned earlier, is impacts working is the question that a lot of legislators are currently asking. And doing evaluations for grant cycle 1 and grant cycle 2 would allow for the opportunity to see what that landscape looks like after the rollout of impacts. So the proposed evaluations for grant cycle 1 and grant cycle 2 are $426,000 and $406,000 respectively, coming at a $832,000 kind of like package. Regarding the future evaluation, it's $406,000 with an asterisk, as you'll see on this slide, and that really just depends on personnel costs, salary, fringe, etc. At that future date. But those are what is up for consideration today in terms of supporting that existing data infrastructure and future research investments. Are there any questions about this specific CHSC consideration before I move on to the next slide that kind of shows everything all together? Okay, not seeing any. So this is hopefully a helpful summary slide. You kind of have three options, three considerations here. To fully fund all efforts, which means fully funding the existing data infrastructure, and then grant cycle 1, grant cycle 2, and grant cycle 3 evaluations. I'm seeing now that I don't believe my slide is accurate, so I apologize, but $1,238,000 to OHSU CHC is actually for all 3 evaluations, and I apologize that that is listed incorrectly here. But to fully fund all that, it's about $1.8 million. Alternatively, we could support the existing infrastructure. Thank you, Avery. Support the existing infrastructure and fund the first 2 evaluations, kind of all the work and efforts that have been in existence to date, more or less. We are currently in the 2nd grant cycle of impacts, and therefore, we would have grant cycle 1 and grant cycle 2 evaluations, which would get us through that June 30th of 2024 date when this current grant cycle ends. That total investment is about $1.4 million. And then we do have an option to support infrastructure and only fund 1 evaluation. So we could, again, fully support the existing infrastructure of the REDCap database, make sure that grantees are still able to use that it's safely hosted at OHSU, that OHSU is able to provide that really helpful technical assistance to be able to report that data. And then 1 evaluation that's statewide for the first grant cycle of the 2020 to 2022 time period to kind of get a next look. Of course, there are other combinations that aren't represented on this slide, but those are, what we thought we would pose as considerations. And for staff recommendation, would be kind of that middle of the road package. So to fully support that infrastructure and fund 2 of the proposed 3 evaluations. So that would basically in practice look like applying the statutorily required 3% of the new funds, that 300,000, as well as about 1.1 million of the previously unallocated 1.4 million to fully maintain that data infrastructure and support statewide evaluations for Grant Cycle 1 and Grant Cycle 2. I realize that is there's a lot of information and many words for you all to hear and digest. So are there any questions or any discussion from the GRC at this time? Dr. Brigham, yeah. You are on mute currently.
Let me try that. I joined the meeting a little late, so I didn't see the first presentation, but I guess a general question I have is more about what the research plan would look like. Like, what exactly are we studying? Because there's so much diversity within the applicants of what we do. So are we talking about sort of characterizing the efforts that have been made, what each grantee has done, and looking at the outcomes from those versus some summary of, impacts folks in general?
Yeah, of course. Stephanie, are you still around and would you like to summarize?
Sure, I can give it a stab. So the statewide evaluation would really be trying to assess whether impacts met its stated goals of reducing interactions with the criminal justice system, high intensity healthcare utilization among that target population, and institutional placements. So using those as hypotheses, we'd measure a lot of different outcomes. We'd be measuring those both for the impacts target population specifically, but also statewide. So we'd have comparison groups, and using those comparison groups will help us tease out what changes over time might be attributable to things experienced by both groups, like COVID or ballot measure 110 or other policy changes, versus what are the things that we can tease out as being attributable to the impacts program. That's very brief. Does it answer your question though?
Somewhat, yes, but not completely, because there really is no impacts. That's not a thing. It's just a grant, and with a bunch of grantees that had considerable latitude to design and implement what they were going to implement. So I think what you're describing would be comparing basically all of the impacts participants in these wide range of activities with other groups outside of, that weren't quote impacts grantees.
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair characterization. There'd be some nuances, right? So we would do a lot to try to balance our comparison groups and make sure that they're, apples to apples. We would, oh, sorry, I lost it. Yes, what you're saying is correct. Because there's a lot of the programs, there's no like roster, like this is an impacts person. Our approach takes kind of an intent to treat approach. So it would be looking at kind of population characterized as closely as we can to the folks that impacts programs are serving. Ken, did you want to jump in?
Oh, I was going to let you finish first, but I think, Dr. Brigham, the way that I like to think about these two is that, or about the whole research plan, is that both of these approaches really go hand in hand. So the work that Stephanie and her folks are doing it does kind of conceptualize impacts more as a thing that is across the state. And yes, there's variation between programs, between approaches. They all still have the same goal, however, and we're trying to determine whether impacts as a thing is having a positive impact. I hate that we have to keep using that word over and over. in the counties and in the tribal areas in which it's found, so that we can then try to provide proof of concept to legislators to expand, to say this is something that should be rolled out elsewhere. Again, with the nuances that we see program to program. The nuances are really contained, however, in the REDCap data that we're collecting, the qualitative work that's being done at that slightly lower level. And so we also will have the data to talk about what are the differences, and maybe we can see what the differences are, perhaps as we're rolling out what types of programs would we like to have in the rest of the state, or should we prioritize certain programming over others? And so I think that it's hard to divorce the two, even though we're talking about them as separate pieces. I think that both of them are ones that will help us in conversations with the legislature, because they do kind of have proof of concept at different levels. But that's at least how I'm viewing them, is that, you know, you're exactly right. It's difficult to call impacts a thing because of the variety, but we can see that variety at one level and we can test the effectiveness at another.
Thank you, Ken, and thank you, Stephanie, for helping providing an explanation. Do members of the GRC have any further questions or discussion points that we want to hit before talking about taking some action?
This is Stacy Brubeck. I just wanted to ask a question about, so of those three, with all of those three options, money isn't necessary. We have the money to do any of them and not taking away from something else.
Right. So for the three options presented here on this slide, I guess the highest one, this 1.8 million, that would leave a little under $10 million, well, probably about like $9.6 million for funding investments into future impacts opportunities, which we'll talk about next, of whether that's maintenance of existing programs to some extent, or is it a new RFGP with reapplication. So okay. That's the only one that might take away. The middle of the ground, which is the staff recommendation, 1.4, really just use the unallocated funds and reserves that $10 million that was appropriated in the most recent legislative session for use with grantees. Just with some clever math, that 3% of funds, the 300,000, would be added to the unallocated funds and basically switch so that we're maintaining on statute here. Ken, did you have anything that you would like to add?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think you're hitting on it. $300,000 has to be spent on research efforts. It does. I guess it would not have to be spent on these research efforts, but they have to be spent that way. The remaining money technically is money that, yes, could be used for programming. I think that, at least in my view, I think we've learned when engaging with the legislature that having our research ducks in a row it's pretty key to continuing funding. But I think it is important to be upfront that everything beyond the 300,000 could be devoted to programming. And I think that's why this is actually a more difficult decision than maybe at first appears.
Actually, I'm so sorry, Dr. Brigham. I think Alicia Beamer's hand was raised before yours. Alicia.
Yeah, no, that I think Ken answered the part about the 300,000. So that's how much we need to spend, which I remember from the initiation of this program. And then, so I'm imagining that whatever we invest in this data that we're trying to gather is going to help not only just these programs, but it will help advocacy on other levels of the state. Is that reasonable to consider? I mean, will the data be okay?
Yeah, and especially, at a minimum, the infrastructure that exists for that REDCap database, that's critical to the current program, so that they're able to report data to the CJC that we're able to look at it, you know, and report it out to other folks to see what's going on at the local level. Then, you know, in terms of policy advocacy for, you know, at the legislative level, statewide evaluation, I think would be of great interest. And, you know, hopefully I'm not missing anything, but Ken, feel free to hop in if you think so.
You know, I would just add that, you know, when we think about our budget presentations that we had in front of the legislature last go round, Alicia, you did an amazing job of bringing in some of the local tales from your experience in the emergency department. But I think that what has always been missing in my interactions with legislative folks, whether it's the fiscal office or actual legislators, is that kind of statewide comparison. And so I think that Casey's right. The REDCap is absolutely critical because that's going to be our data link into our programs that will actually really be able to show what's happening at that low, you know, kind of interior level. But the statewide evaluation as well, I would view that as an investment because I think it could lead to more dollars going forward as we show the impact. Yeah, that's at least the way that I've been thinking about it as we've gone through with these options.
Thank you.
Dr. Brigham, thank you for your patience.
Sure. So I'm basically going to say the same thing again, probably just that I'm very concerned that we don't systematically characterize the interventions within the impacts program and have some way to tie those to the outcomes for those participants that participated in those various efforts. Because just over the years, it seems to me we've had a wide range of proposals for what we're going to do and a wide range of success or lack of it in implementing those, actually getting those operational. So if what I suspect is we have a wide range of effect sizes for these various interventions, and we don't capture that, we may have a very disappointing outcome when we actually have very good data within the program, but we're just not characterizing, you know, the interventions that they participated in and how well those were implemented, and, you know, which participant outcomes are linked to those. So maybe there's more to the research plan than I'm grasping, and I appreciate it that we do have some information about those individual interventions, but I'm just concerned with studying this as a group when they're really not a group.
Stephanie, did you have something you'd like to weigh in on?
Yeah, no, if I could. I think the points you're making are exactly right. And those are things that we've considered in our evaluation proposal. I didn't even touch on them in my presentation because I felt like it was getting too in the weeds. But since it's important, I think the two things I'd say in response to that. First of all, I think your point that, you know, it can take a while for programs to mature. The way that our evaluation will work is we wouldn't assume that, you know, come July 2020, impacts is in full effect. We'd have more granular data about, you know, some of the programs we know it took a long time for people to hire. Programs are wrestling with COVID, right? Because that was going on at the same time. So we have an approach. It's called a staggered differences, but basically it accounts for the fact that there is kind of this staggered implementation. It took some grantees more time than others to get off the ground. So we'll be able to capture that. The other thing I'd say is to your point about the variation in the programs. Again, didn't display this today, but we have characterized the programs as focusing in certain domains. So we have some programs that are really focused on the criminal justice side. Others provide housing support. Some are really focused on stabilization, and there's, you know, there's combinations of those. And so one thing that we plan to do is, in addition to doing kind of an overall impacts and kind of clumping them all together, while we're going to avoid doing any grantee comparisons, we're also going to do some sub-analyses that will look at among the impacts grantees who are really focusing, like that, you know, they've got people in the jails or parole officers and supports. Do we see different effects, you know, among those ones, and kind of get a sense that what's working? So not only is impact as a big thing working, but like what types of program concentrations are showing different changes in different domains.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
All right. Is there any further discussion or questions regarding the options presented or preferences? You know, general ideas about how the GRC would like to move forward? Liz, yes.
Hi, I'm still relatively newer to this group, so I'm going to put that caveat out before I answer the question, but I am hearing that some of the funding attached to these research proposals could in theory be used for service dollars for the grantees. Are there any large or notable areas that grantees are saying that they need more investment that we aren't currently able to meet? Or are the grantees really feeling resourced at the level they need right now?
No, that's a great question. So there are several grantees who have expressed interest in building capacity or expanding their scopes of work, and the funds that they have currently do not allow them to do that. So that is a consideration, that kind of like growth expansion, where I think we're calling them capacity building funds at this time. The options that we were going to propose today for consideration in terms of, you know, grantee funding, all of them have some sort of competitive process, you know, based on GRC member feedback at the August meeting. So it would be some sort, you know, they're very different levels, but some sort of performance evaluation, and as well as a very deep look at the current spending rates of programs. Some programs are very underspent and may very well not require any additional funding for 2 more years. They may better benefit from an extension of their project period, for instance, instead of additional funding. So there's quite a lot to juggle here with financial feasibility, and as well as, you know, desires and hopes for impacts. But the reason that we kind of are presenting to you all in this way today is that it's almost like a small decision needs to be made to allow the grant staff to see what options then to present for the bigger picture. And because at least the REDCap database is so critical to, you know, even moving forward with this program in any respect, we thought that would be a good place to start, is to, you know, to what extent does the GRC want to support that, and then to what extent are they interested in maybe thinking about longevity and sustainability of funding through, you know, having data to show other folks. Does that answer your question, Liz?
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful.
So does anyone have any feelings, I guess, on the staff recommendation here about fully supporting the infrastructure and funding 2 evaluations? Again, I guess the previous slide shows all 3, if that's helpful to look at. Judge Shanti? Sorry, Judge Shanti.
I'm sorry, I was
no,
on mute.
there you are.
I make a motion that we fund according to what staff has recommended, which is the second funding consideration.
This is Alicia Beamer, I second.
there any further discussion? Okay. Well, we've heard a motion for supporting the staff recommendation that is presented on this screen, which is, general consensus to apply the statutorily required 3%, $300,000 of that newly appropriated money and $1,132,000 of the previously unallocated funds to fully maintain the existing data infrastructure and then support 2 of the proposed 3 statewide evaluations. So that would cover Grant Cycle 1, July 1st of 2020 through June 30th of 2022, and Grant Cycle 2, which is July 1st of 2022 through June 30th of this coming year, 2024. So that is the decision before you all today. Here I will proceed to ask for those who abstain, those in favor, and those opposed. Are there any abstentions from this vote? Okay, hearing none. And before we go into the vote, I realize, Avery, could you confirm quorum one last time?
Yes, we have quorum.
Thank you very much. So all those in favor of supporting the staff recommendation that's presented to you right here to fully support the $600,000 to OHSU PSU School of Public Health for existing data infrastructure and the $832,000 to OHSU CHSE for 2 statewide evaluations, please say aye.
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 Right. Those opposed, please say nay. Okay, then that passes. Thank you very much for your votes and attention to that matter. We are moving on to future program funding investments. And I think I'm gonna need a sip of water before I get into this. Sorry, one moment. Ooh, okay. So I have outlined 4 general directions for you all today. So we took the interests and desires that you had expressed back in the August meeting, and as I mentioned earlier in response to Liz's question, kind of coupled those with financial feasibility to create the recommendations that you see here for your consideration today. With the decision that you just made to basically apply approximately 1.4 million of the 11.4 million available funds towards that supporting the existing infrastructure and research and data developments, we can safely say we're working with $10 million right now. So kind of a very even, clean $10 million. So one of the main things that was brought up last meeting was how we evaluate the programs and what they're doing, who actually needs this money, how do we take a look at that? And so having some sort of competitive process or, performance evaluation as a component of each of these considerations was a way to tackle that. And when the slides, especially on the far left 2 here, the 2 options that say maintain existing programs, know that means that, grant staff are looking at their, spending rate, thinking really of a formulaic option of how much money they actually need based on what they have spent and what they still have left in their bank. Excuse me. So starting at that far left there, the maintain existing programs and a competitive opportunity for capacity building. What this means in practice is that grantees would be given a formulaic award based on their average spending over past quarters, and then there would be a competitive opportunity to apply for remaining funds. As of this most recent quarter, 3 of the 15 grantees are on track with spending. That means that they are spending what they have been given to date. 8 of the 15 grantees are kind of at a moderate spending level, and that comes from a variety of reasons. hiring challenges, program implementation. There's many, honestly. And so 8 are at a moderate spending level, which means that they have money that is left in their bank that has been given them to date, as well as other disbursements of their award that are yet to come. So they're underspent, but only moderately so. And then 4 of the 15 grantees are very underspent. And we're talking currently like under 33% of their total award. So that kind of informed a lot of the considerations that we were going to present to you here today, knowing that, almost 12 of the 15 grantees would not need what they had previously requested just to maintain some sort of current service level action, but wanting also to provide an opportunity for the grantees who are saying, hey, we really would like to do more, or we want to build, upon our existing program, we want to expand our scope of work, to allow kind of a competition for that aspect. So grant staff would work to develop this like recommended formulaic award for the GRC to review and approve, and tell you, how we got there, based on their spending, based on like their, the budgets that they're hoping to tackle in these next 2 years. And then a solicitation could be opened for those interested in applying for the unallocated funds. To just provide you with some very rough figures, with the $10 million that was available, it would allow for a little over $1 million. I believe it was about, maybe $1 million of that expansion of scope of work for the competitive funds. And that would get everyone, an additional, rather not additional, excuse me, but that would give everyone maintenance of what they are currently operating at, be that, additional funding or additional time to spend down the money that they have not yet spent. So that is the consideration here on that far left. Let's see. So for that next one, the one with the jars of different coins, maintain existing programs, and then a competitive process for capacity building and or new applicants. This is kind of this approach rather is kind of a mixture of the process that I just described to you there on the far left, and very reminiscent of what we did in the 2022 funding cycle. You all who were present at that time might remember we did a carryover exercise. So we had grantees estimate, how much they would need, how much they had left in the bank. And, we didn't really apply a formulaic award based on spending. We kind of really left it up to the grantees for interpretation, and it worked out well. But I think this time around, we would want to include some sort of formulaic award based on their spending and what they need. That way we're not getting, very generous overestimates of what is feasible to spend down in 2 years. And then the unallocated funds, so let's say it's around a little over 1 million again, would be open for a competitive process of not only for the existing grantees to apply for that capacity building or the expansion of the scopes of work, but for new applicants to apply, should there be other places or programs that think that Impacts is the right fit for them. So that is definitely what we, a mixture of what we did in the 2022 grant cycle and then that far left option. That is how we kind of came to having 4 new grant programs for the 2022 to 2024 grant cycle. And so those are 2 of the considerations. Then we move over to the stack of applications, which is that third picture in, and that is a competitive process that is available to all. This would basically mean grant staff would develop and release a request for grant proposals in early 2024, and existing grantees and new applicants alike would be able to complete a competitive application. Through this process, you could really evaluate existing programs on their performance history. So it's like, oh, thank you. We see you have reapplied for the Impacts grant. Here is, what we think we would like to see out of a program that has already been at this for 2 years or already been at this for 4 years, as well as review new applications. So that is kind of that competitive process available to all. And then that last option on the far right is a competitive process available to existing programs only. So it's also kind of a clean slate approach. Grant staff would develop and release a request for grant proposals in early 2024, but it would be available only to existing programs. So only programs that are currently the 15 that are existing right now would be eligible to apply for that 10 million. And, that would allow for folks to expand their scopes of work. It might also allow for additional scrutiny in terms of performance evaluation. But those are kind of the general ideas that we wanted to present to you all today. However, we welcome discussion and thoughts and other ideas and questions. But hopefully this gives you something to kind of react to. And basically we have just a little over 1 hour left of this meeting. And what I am hoping to get from you today is a decision on what you want future program funding to look like for Impacts, the grant as a whole. Whatever you decide, I can then figure out, the mechanism through which it is applied and rolled out. But we definitely need that guidance today. Dr. Brigham, I saw your hand up first.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. I think the first two to the left, so one is just maintaining existing programs, then the one with the jars is existing programs plus a competitive process for capacity and new applicants. But in either of those options, the maintained existing programs, is there I don't think I heard you mention like a performance component to that, like looking at the programs to see if they have performed.
Yeah, I think, no, you're understanding correctly. That maintenance of existing programs was just that formulaic approach of, the grantee A has spent 0% of their funds. They definitely do not need more money. Grantee B has spent 33% of their funds. They do not need considerable funding. And then kind of coming out with that approach. And then only allowing, that performance evaluation for the expansions of scope of work or capacity building. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Yeah, I think that that competitive process that you're mentioning would likely be the fourth option. Kind of that blank slate, only the 15 existing can apply, but everyone is going through a rigorous competitive process for that application, and maybe not all 15 would continue to be Impacts grantees after that time. And $10 million would be, distributed accordingly to the GRC decision. That make okay sense, Dr. Brigham?
Yeah, I think so. I guess, as you were going through them, I kind of favored that second one from the left. But I also liked the idea that you talked about later of having some sort of, evaluation of the existing programs, in addition to just the fiscal, what have you spent, what are you going to need? But anyway, but you did answer my question. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. And of course, there are probably 500 different options of how you all could choose to go forward with this money. And so, you know, if I take financial feasibility into account, we'll reduce that down to 300 options. But, you know, these are definitely not the only 4 options that are financially feasible. And it's very possible that some sort of hybrid could exist, especially between, you know, I could see options 2 and 4 marrying pretty well. So maybe what would happen is grant staff would go through that formulaic recommendation, and then there would be some sort of, you know, solicitation to existing grantees only about, you know, what, you know, maybe there's certain priorities or preferences that the GRC wants to see. So they have to kind of compete to maintain at that formulaic rate. And then there is a, you know, a new opportunity for existing grantees and new applicants beyond that, for unallocated funds. So it kind of like prioritizes existing folks, gives them a chance before, you know, giving the RFGP out to the world. But yeah, that's another possibility of the 200 that are probably still financially feasible. All right. Marcia, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I concur with what was just said. I'm leaning towards the first and second options. My only concern is the utter, you know, hand wringing and guessing game of the state budgets and funding and that. So taking on new applicants would be concerning because we just don't know what the state's going to do. So as far as making sure everything's fully funded. So if we take on new applicants, are we actually going to be able to do that? Unless we're fully funded by the state. So I'm leaning towards 1 and 2. I'd love to add more applicants, but we just have to have some assurances that we're actually going to get the funding that we need.
A very valuable comment. Thank you. Liz, I saw your hand up next.
Would you say a little bit about anticipated timelines for any sort of competitive process? And I'm saying this from the perspective of being a state agency person working through extended procurement processes that limit our window for grantees to spend the money by the time they get it. So I don't know if your competitive processes may move more quickly than ours, but I'd love to hear an estimation of timeline for that.
No, absolutely. Yeah, so first it's worth noting that the appropriations of impacts funding to date have actually been in other fund. So we do have a little bit more flexibility across biennia, where luckily there isn't that hard line in the sand that if you don't make it past, you have to get the money back. So that being said, a very rough timeline that I have on my phone, so pardon while I look down at this, a decision today is key. And then request for grant proposal development in January of 2024, followed by a release in February. We would then want about 60 to 90 days for you know, proposals to be out in the world and before that due date. That is a lot higher than our standard CJC 45-day turnaround, but that like, I guess that general timeline came from a lot of feedback we received from tribes, as well as other smaller counties that, you know, don't have a dedicated grant writer. They need extra time. Tribal consultation is also a requirement for any new applicants, and that takes time. And in fact, that's the reason that the RFGP development wouldn't even start until January, is because the CJC would need to enter a tribal consultation to discuss the decision that you all made today and what that funding will, you know, looks like and how it will affect opportunities for tribal governments. So if we did a 60-day timeline, that would be early to mid-April proposals would be due. And if we did the 75 to 90-day timeline, that would be early-ish May. And then we would get all those materials to the grant review committee with a 30-day window for review, depending on, you know, how many applications. That was also kind of like lesson learned. You know, having a month to review a lot of that dense information is pretty critical for your process. So building that in, it takes us to around early June for that GRC review and discussion, as well as the awards. And then hopefully with that early June decision, that means that contracts would be out for signature in time before that June 30th line. So keeping the folks, for instance, if they were an existing grantee that were in this process hoping for more money to continue on this June 30th date because we've spent everything you've given to us, that would give them that continuity. I will caveat all of that with just a huge grain of salt because obviously this wasn't fully fleshed out and needs some you know, guidance and information from you all before I can actually flesh out dates. But that's a general timeline for your consideration. All right, Judge Shanti, your hand was up next.
All right. So I do appreciate the issue raised about if we do new applicants, we might, we don't know what the legislature is going to do. That's all true, but we don't know what the legislature is going to do anyway. And I kind of like the idea of the number 2, the capacity building for the ones that are like really gung-ho and have used their money and are making progress. But I also think that it would be good to have an opportunity for new applicants because there's a bunch of reasons that someone might not have applied originally, or their grant application originally wasn't up to snuff. And we've had a sea change in a lot of ways in terms of what's going on out there in our community. And so there might be new ideas. You know, we've got, these people are on their track that they developed from, you know, 4 years ago. And I know they've been doing some adjustments, but I would like to leave an opportunity for someone that has a really good idea but needs some seed money to get it going, to make a pitch. I have to go, so I can't. Can I vote by proxy and just say I want number 2, and if that one's ever put up, or do I have to be here for it?
Unfortunately, I do think you need to be here for it. I'm so sorry, Judge Shanti.
Well, too bad. I have to go, but I do think that there might be a brilliant idea out there in a little community that could just, if they just had some seed money, they could do something fabulous. And I don't want to close that down. Thank you, guys. You guys are all grand, and unfortunately, I have to go.
Thank you, Judge Shanti. Take care. Before I move back to Dr. Brigham, I will just provide a comment that, you know, with Marcia's earlier comment about the concern for the new applicants, $10 million, you know, sounds like a lot of money, but it really is not. And as you can see, some of the options that I actually really liked that ended up not being financially feasible are not presented on the slides today. And those options were, you know, consider giving everyone what they previously asked for, and then some, with 10% for inflation. So I think something that you all need to take into consideration is, you know, the existing programs have gone through that setup, that implementation. They are at least on the ground and running. This would be 2 more years. Additionally, they have, you know, higher personnel costs. Those grow every single year. And so even if they were to stay completely status quo, they need additional funding in some aspect. And, you know, some of the things that you all brought up at the August meeting were the intent of the impacts program out of Senate Bill 973 specifically, like what do you want this program to look like in the years to come? Is it continuing to be a pilot, or are we going to focus in on kind of that best practices and performance evaluation? So I'm posing these comments as items for discussion, but yeah, there were quite a few opportunities that did allow for our existing grantees to maintain full support and then keep on going, and they unfortunately are just not financially feasible with even $11.4 million. Had no research and data. If we were like, oh, good luck on your Excel sheets for data, even with $11.4 million, they were not financially feasible. Dr. Brigham.
So I did have a comment. I'm not sure it's still good after what you were just saying, Casey. So I think I don't have as good a command of the, just where the grantees are at and what they've asked for and so on as you have. I was going to suggest something like looking at option 2 there, which does also include expansion. So that's the part I'm not sure about now after listening to your comment. But what I was thinking before was maybe we could take like a staged approach. So do the first part of that, maintenance of existing programs, see what that financially takes out of the available funds, then look at the second gate there, which would be competitive process for capacity building. So then look at what proposals come in, and the ones we want to select and fund, and see what that does to available funds. And then if there's money remaining, open it up. So as Judge Shante was saying, there's probably good ideas out there. There were good programs in previous rounds that didn't get funded. They might want to resubmit. So anyway, so that was my original thought was, maybe that second option in a sort of staged approach, and maybe the money is committed then by the second stage of that, and there is no third stage, and that's what we would do. But I don't know how that fits now with the new information.
No worries. Thank you for sharing that anyways. One other thing to throw your way for consideration actually is around Liz Weber's earlier comment about timing, and how long these processes take. So I guess I would recommend considering that as well. I like the stage approach idea. I think that's very fair, but I do worry that with a staged approach, that the last bit of opening up a brand new RFGP for the money that's left may not happen until later in 2024. And then those folks are not getting a full 2 years to even begin standing up their program. So that's just something we're thinking about. I also, I see your hand, Stacy. I'm definitely gonna get to you in a second. I was notified that we are officially just at quorum now with 9. So please, if you need to leave, please let us know, because we want to make sure that we get a decision on this while we have quorum today. So we have 9 GRC members here presently, and that is quorum, and we are okay. But if there's any need to leave, please inform us. So, Stacy.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Jackson County was one of those that did apply and didn't get funded. And I would tell you right now, if this was offered to us today, we probably would not reapply just because we have so much money coming at us and we have a workforce shortage. So even though we get these dollars, we can't hire the bodies to do the work. They're just not out there. And so I think that I'm more supportive of trying to support and maintain who we've already funded and help them be able to continue to get their legs under them rather than considering going out for new applicants. I just don't think the timing is right.
Thank you, Stacy. I appreciate your comment. Liz, I see your hand.
I'm full of questions today. um, I see analogies for sure in the housing system, right? And so I do really appreciate the impulse to continue to fund existing service providers, especially because lots of these services depend on effective relationship building to succeed, and that doesn't happen quickly. So I think that's an important piece of this. One of my questions around competitive process and what previous rounds have looked like is, um, would opening up a competitive process give opportunities for smaller, emerging, or culturally specific organizations who did not apply in previous rounds to apply? I'm just not familiar enough with what prior rounds look like.
Yeah, so a competitive process available to all, so that third one with the stack of applications there, that would be the clean slate option of, hey, anyone who's interested, please feel free to apply. However, in Senate Bill 973, this grant specifically is only open to local county governments and local tribal governments. So while the grantees that even we have now a lot of them are contracting through culturally specific organizations, smaller, organizations. We do see a ton of that subcontracting work being done currently. It is the larger LIP6 or the larger tribal governments that do have to directly apply. That, being said, it could be something that the GRC, may consider for a priority of like, hey, competitive process open to all. We would really like to see your collaboration with X, Y, and Z. So.
Great, thank you for that clarification.
Dr. Brigham.
Yes, so I was going to offer to make a motion, just being sensitive to the quorum issue, but now I'm thinking about it more. I think I actually probably need to abstain. I'll stay on for quorum, but I'll abstain and won't make a motion.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other thoughts or discussion from members that we maybe haven't heard from yet today? Or, folks that have been waiting for an opportunity to speak, and now I'm calling you out saying it's your time. Okay. Well, I guess to summarize some of the discussion that's happened so far, we've had, equal parts concern and excitement for the opportunity for new applicants. We have had, a lot of folks express desire to, maintain current programs in some capacity. And we have heard some excitement for the opportunity for capacity building and expansion of scope of work. I think, what I've heard kind of be like at least, from the folks who have spoken so far, it seems like the third option, the competitive process to all, is the least favored option currently. So that being said, we are left with that competitive process available to existing programs only, that far right option. So what that would look like in practice is, only existing folks are eligible to reapply, but that would allow the GRC, kind of a lot of opportunity to review performance, evaluate, actual impact of impacts programs, and to apply some, intense scrutiny to whether or not programs could continue, grant staff could, provide you with spending reports, at least from that aspect. We could take a look at, maybe a deep dive into different characteristics of all grantee programs, let you know, here are the ones that are, providing housing and at what level. Here are the ones that, offer case management and at what level, to kind of give you a full picture for an evaluative process in that way. So that's that option there. At the far right, the competitive process available to existing programs only. And then on the left-hand side, we have the two kind of maintenance consideration options. One that has just a competitive opportunity for capacity building, and one that's a competitive opportunity for capacity building and opportunity for new applicants to join in. So I guess for your consideration on those, again, we have $10 million to work with, and that is not enough funding to give everyone what they want. So that maintenance of existing programs would be really a formulaic approach based on spending over the last, either 2 or 4 quarters, depending on, what, appears to be the most feasible. But that could help a few grantees, especially the ones who are on track for spending. So we've spent everything you've given us, and therefore we are eligible to get more money. That also could potentially hurt a few grantees who have really struggled with hiring or have not yet got their programs off the ground. They would not be eligible to, their formula would basically cut their funding pretty short. They would get an extension of a project period instead of, additional funding. And this is all, hypothetical. But yeah, I'll stop talking. Sam, I saw your hand go up, so I will defer the floor.
Thank you. I just had a question. I mean, it's not necessarily an all or nothing, right, in terms of evaluating the programs, right? If we wanted sort of the information to really get an understanding of the spend plans and all of that, even for the first and second choice, that's still possible, right? In terms of, we don't have to go all the way to the competitive process for the existing grantees only in order to do that level of review and understanding. I just want to clarify that. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's fair. As part of those first 2 options, we as grant staff, we could definitely present to you those characteristics, those spending, reports, etc., for you all to decide. That is, a competitive process of sorts, just because some, or may not competitive rather, but a performance evaluation of sorts that you could take into consideration when considering, take into consideration for maintenance of those existing programs, some sort of performance evaluation. Does that answer your question, Sam?
It does. And I think that I appreciated, Stacey, what you said just around like there's money coming in, but whether or not there's the humans to actually do the work, even if the infrastructure and program is beautifully developed, that's, remains a challenge across all levels of service. And, I wouldn't want to discourage innovation that we haven't seen, but even then, looking at existing grantees, appreciating that some are, again, between workforce or other, issues that were really potentially outside of their control, so to speak, we want to support and continue to see through. It still would be nice to understand some of the efforts that have been made in order to fully come to that decision.
Thank you, Sam. So that leads me to think that, maybe one of those first two options suits best, and possibly the very first option. And as part of that maintenance of existing programs, yeah, we could maintain and evaluate existing programs. So the maintenance would be based on an evaluation of existing programs. So it, allows grantees to maybe express their desires for growth and continuance, but also provides the CJC, maybe even OHSU, the opportunity to show you all kind of some analysis of like, here are how these grantees are performing, based on spending. Here are where their programs are focusing. Here is, their data reporting. Maybe some grantees have really struggled to, even report data. Those are some ideas. But yeah, do any other GRC members have thoughts on kind of that leaning towards that maintenance and maybe evaluation of existing programs? And then, sorry, as I finished this thought, I had another one. Also kind of leading back to maybe Dr. Brigham's stage approach idea of maybe the first level you all look at is the maintenance and evaluation of existing programs. And then after that, seeing what funds are left to then allow for competitive opportunity for capacity building. Or alternatively, you could collapse it all together and have the maintenance of existing programs include that competitive opportunity for capacity building.
Casey, maybe I'll take a stab at a motion that tries to encapsulate what you just mentioned, and then at least we could have an up or down vote on it to try to move forward. So I think the motion that I'll make is that I would move that we, with the remaining $10 million that we have, we move forward with the goal of maintaining existing programs as far as practicable, following an evaluation of each program through an application process. And if at the end of that process we have remaining funds, then we would present that as a competitive opportunity for capacity building.
This is Curtis Landers. I'll second that motion.
All right, is there any further discussion? Do we have any thoughts and feedback on the presented motion? I tried to write down some notes as you spoke, Ken. So the goal of maintenance of existing programs following an evaluation through some sort of application process, some performance evaluative process. And then if and when there are remaining funds, opening up a competitive process for that capacity building. I hope I captured that correctly.
Yeah, that does. I mean, and the reason why I stated it as a goal is that that leaves us open to where we're not guaranteeing funding to anybody, but we're hopefully still stating our preference towards maintenance for existing programs. And my thought would be that the evaluation process, we can ask grantees, what are their greatest barriers that they're encountering to success? What are, how would they explain their current spending levels, especially for the grantees that are a little bit behind. And we could also engage in that past exercise like we've done, given our different spending patterns. What would you need to get you to the next stage? And that would also permit us to see, how have costs changed given inflation and everything else, and we can kind of see where we're at. Because I know in our other grants, we've really encountered that really kind of pernicious impact of inflation on, when we say we want to maintain CSL, that's a big challenge given how much more expensive everything is now when we don't always get the same amount of increase in funds from the legislature. But at least that's some thought process behind the wording that I used. Hopefully that encapsulated what, kind of what I was thinking.
No, that sounds good, Ken. I appreciate the clarification too. I think that, note of how the goal isn't necessarily a guarantee of maintenance for all programs. I think that's an important note to make. Is there further discussion from the GRC before we move into a voice vote for the motion? Yeah, Sheriff Landers.
Yeah, I just want to say, I know, as Ken mentioned with the application part of it, I think for current grantees, it'd be nice to maybe start, kind of fall in line with what Judge Shante was saying about giving opportunities for other communities to apply for this funding. Maybe see if current grantees can start finding other sustainable funding to keep the programs alive and moving forward. And then another part of that is also sharing their experiences somehow statewide. Again, I think a lot of the initial pieces of this funding when the legislators passed it was these startup programs that hopefully the ones that are successful that others can build off of in the state and see the same types of success.
That sounds great. Yeah, I'm hearing like kind of a priority for folks to be seeking sustainable funding, and especially in regard to your comment about sharing success. We definitely have an excellent opportunity to do that at some sort of webinar or conference, as was proposed as part of the OHSU PSU School of Public Health's shindig. I'm losing my words. But we had a conference that almost all grantees were present at, the Crisis Intervention Training Conference back in May. And the folks who participated in panels and were just there to even network, that was such a success in sharing, the work that these folks are doing and sharing it statewide and region-wide with Washington and Idaho as well. So I think having another webinar and another conference opportunity like that would be a great idea. Thank you, Sheriff. Great. Any other discussion or comments before we proceed with the vote? I guess we can proceed with the vote, and then we can just chat about maybe some of the things that you would want to evaluate if the vote passes. That way I can kind of have those noted down. But I'm not seeing any hands, not seeing anyone pop off mute. So if there are no further questions, we'll proceed with the vote. The decision before you now is whether or not you support Ken's motion, which more or less said this GRC will have a goal to maintain existing programs while not guaranteeing funding for everyone. And that would follow an evaluative process through which grantees could apply for funding, show what they need, and also have grant staff provide some sort of analysis piece as to their performance overall. And then if and when there are funds remaining, there could be a competitive process for capacity building among the grantees. And I will just state this for the record, that this is not allowing for new applicants to the grant program. So are there any abstentions? Dr. Brigham, you had mentioned you would earlier. Just want to give you the opportunity again.
Yes, I have a potential conflict of interest, so I'm going to abstain.
Okay, so we'll note that down. Are there any other abstentions? And meanwhile, Avery, could you just confirm we have quorum one last time, please?
We do have quorum.
Thank you. And I'm not seeing any other abstentions. So all of those in favor of the proposed motion by Ken, please say aye.
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 Great. And those opposed, please say nay. Okay, hearing none, so that passes. Thank you for that guidance. I appreciate it. So in terms of next steps, we have about a half hour left, and I want to respect everyone's time. But I think maybe talking about the things that you would hope to see in some sort of performance evaluation, what would be of interest to you? And that way I can develop some sort of mechanism through which, folks can get you that information. So in addition to, but very obvious, a spending report, we have, as grant staff here at CJC, have recently done a deep dive into all the different characteristics that grantee programs have. It looks like a big bowl of spaghetti, as Will Ashhausen says, the researcher who has developed this social network analysis. But it does a great job of comparing, the programs with these core characteristics. So I guess, would it be of interest to you all to look at the programs, what core characteristics programs share, who the outliers are that maybe don't have those core characteristics, that could inform, I guess, not only like evaluation of sorts, but maybe priorities of like, hey, if you want to do some expansion of work in some realm, we would support, looking at housing or something to that effect. Would that be of interest to you all? And are there other ideas for evaluative pieces? Leisha.
Yeah, it's been an honor to be part of this since the inception of the program. And I mean, when we started, we had a vision that, or, my understanding, and I think the vision was that we would have these models of care in each county and then we would, for example, I think there's one of the ones that we funded was a crisis stabilization center. There's the tribal models, even the model that we talked about and voted on today. That model of care with intensive case management and those different things. We had talked about, all these different models, and then we would evaluate them and see if they're working. And then with the opportunity that we would, if this seems like it is really working in one county, can we replicate it in other counties and build a more robust funding mechanism for that from a legislative approach? So I guess that is what I would love to see from the evaluation, is really looking at these different program models and knowing they're different in each county, and also rural versus, more of a suburban or urban market. But how do we evaluate that so we can advocate for longer term sustainable funding across the state where we feel like that might be applicable? Would be my recommendation.
Thank you. A quick follow-up question, Alicia. How would you, like to see, what does working mean in that context? I think that, go ahead.
I think the annual report helps. It does kind of go into some deep dive, but hopefully with the funding that we just approved with the for the data is also kind of getting more granular into that, and seeing the outcomes. Is it reducing? We came here with the goal of reducing jail or interfaces with law enforcement and jails and incarceration, and also reducing the interfaces with the medical system, especially the emergency departments. So with that, what models are we seeing some great outcomes, and how can it be replicated? Is what I'm thinking, if that helps. Thanks.
Thank you. Dr. Bergen?
Yes, I think I'd like to see maybe a recap for each one of them of, what is their model? Maybe that's to what Alicia's comment is as well, because I know there has been some changes over time with modifying the application. So what is the current model that the grantee is using? And then some characterization of the degree to which they've been able to implement it. So, which is probably, related to the spending. Obviously, the less they've been able to spend is probably correlated with what degree they've been able to take action on it. And, some assessment, through descriptive or attestation or whatever of the likelihood of being able to continue to implement into the future. So, are there any structural changes within the programming and county or tribe that's in the application that would change the trajectory? So, if we continue to support the effort, will they continue to be able to maintain it?
Thank you. Stacy, do you have a comment?
I swear, Teams hates me. Okay, I just wanted to say that I agree with both Greg and Alicia about wanting to see what best practices are, but I want to just throw out two things. One is that I think we need to realize that these folks really tried to stand up programming in the middle of a pandemic, right? So for me, that feels like next to impossible to have really been able to have the time if they had had that time during a regular course of the world, right? Rather than throughout that pandemic when there were so many challenges thrown their way, as well as the workforce crisis. The other thing I just wanted to say to Alicia's point about different modalities and models, and is it working, is it not working? There are so many buckets of dollars being thrown at these systems right now. I would love for us just to take a breath and coordinate and see what else is out there already. Like for me, for example, even thinking about applying for impacts money right now, it would be about what other efforts are already existing that I'm going to now be having to figure out how I don't step on those toes, that I don't have to start another planning group, that I don't, there's just so many pieces between ballot measure 110 and the implementation of 988 and all of the opioid money and all of those kind of things that really, even the opioid settlement dollars, realizing not all counties are a part of that's about mitigating these types of people. We're trying to try to mitigate them coming around through the system over and over again without services. So I really would love to do a deeper dive into what's successful or not successful, and then figure out from there with all these other funding streams, what is the part that these dollars could really continue to support that aren't, available or coming from other places, because it feels like these impacts dollars may have a little bit more wiggle room than some of the other ones that are coming down. So anyway, that's just, I just feel like these folks haven't had a good start because of the pandemic and the role that played in so many ways, especially with this population. So that's all.
Thank you for that comment. I appreciate it. Dr. Brigham?
Yeah, I think Stacy's comment really made me think of something as well, that the impacts dollars are paying for certain things that the grantees requested, but each of those are being done in a context, in a community where there's a variety of resources available. So, for example, maybe they're being done somewhere where there's a well-resourced mobile crisis, and then maybe another grantee, but that's not funded by impacts necessarily. So I do think at the end of the day, we're gonna want to know, what made these programs work or not work, but not just limited to the dollars that impacts put out. So I don't know if that informs our current, funding decisions or not, but it's more on the conversation of, the goal we had going into this, of understanding what works, and probably needing to expand that to include more in our, characteristics of what worked, of the environment it's being done in, not just what impacts funded. because I think as Stacy was saying, there's so much noise out there. There's so many other funding opportunities and challenges and so on.
In terms of like trying to think of a practical way, a practical approach to include that information in some sort of evaluation, and a narrative comes to mind, you know, asking grantees about the situation. Would it make sense to ask the grantees to like identify what other efforts are in existence in their jurisdictions, and maybe comment on their efforts to collaborate or coordinate? And with that being said, you know, I think something that the GRC might need to take into consideration if we get to that evaluative piece is just the prevalence and availability of some of those efforts. Like, what if a grantee says that there are no other efforts going on in their specific community or their jurisdictions, that their impacts thing is the only thing? Will that hurt their application? Will it help their application? So I think maybe also like, yeah, what were the answer that maybe you're looking for? Alicia, your hand was up next.
Yeah, I wonder though, you know, back to Stacy and Dr. Brigham's point, do we remember when we started and we brought in I mean, this is a model off of another state's impacts grant is modeled off of another state who had that before us, right? And we brought in their information and all their data before we started and kind of just said, this is kind of why we're moving in this direction. And the model would it be helpful to look at their data and what they've gathered, because it was a few years before, and then see where they're at? I mean, I don't know. I'm just putting it out there as something to think about. It would just as a point of interest to see where they're at with theirs. And I could be remembering that wrong. I can see you, Casey, thinking, but.
Are you referencing the CSG evaluation, the Council for State
Well, I remember
Governments?
when we were in Salem and they brought the very first meeting, they brought impacts grant and they showed another state's data and how they had an impacts grant committee or something similar like that. And they had a lot of information and data on how successful it was in their state. And that was why we were moving in this direction. So if I may be remembering that wrong, but if it is out there, it'd be interesting to cross-reference and just see where they're at with their program.
Yeah, no, you very well may be right. That definitely precedes my time at the CJC. Ken, is that ringing any bells for you?
You'll be making it up, but I think
it precedes my time on the
Okay.
impacts program. I mean, I was at CJC, but I have to admit I don't recall that exactly. But Alicia, we can go back through the records and we can see if we can find that.
Okay, I think
Yeah, I
I
just gotta
remember
dig back a
having it.
bit.
I might have it. Yeah, no, if it's out there, it might be interesting to reference. Thank you.
Dr. Brigham, back to you. You're on mute.
Oh, sorry about that.
All
At least
right.
I vaguely remember that as well. At least there was some other program that we did kind of look at and learn about. I don't know if it was, you know, how on point it was, but I also.
Good to know I wasn't making it up. Okay, thank you.
And
But it does look like Bridget's on the call, and wouldn't Bridget maybe know?
And
sorry, Bridget.
To your question, Casey, I guess my comment about characterizing the programs and the environment and so on, I think I digressed a little bit, just, you know, because Stacy's comment stimulated me to think about it, but I don't know that I would include that in the evaluation of the program. I just think, you know, for funding, I think it's maybe more to a point to register as we continue to study the project and, you know, what worked and didn't work. We want to capture more of that context, but I wasn't really intending it so much as a part of our decision-making process about funding.
Thank you. That's a super helpful clarification. Bridget, sorry, I see your hand now. Come on in.
Hi, Casey, and hi, Stacy. I know what you're talking about. I don't recall it being another state, but I am happy to go dig through and see what it was. None of you are imagining this. So BRB, we'll figure this out.
Thank you, Bridget.
Also, hi, everyone.
Okay. I guess one other thing, you know, as we talk about this up for consideration, is how we consider evaluating, I think it goes back to what, I think it was Alicia had said at the beginning of kind of the different models. But it's difficult to compare a tribal program to a county program. It's also difficult to compare a program that has been at this since 2020, you know, to a program who has been at this since June of last year. So those are definitely things that we would want to take into consideration when thinking of evaluation, just so that we're not overcritical or you know, scrutinizing in the wrong way. But yeah, you know, in anticipation for this meeting, Will, Avery, and I put a lot of different ideas down on paper. Avery just sent one my way, to things that we had drafted of possible evaluative pieces for programs. And we split them up into existing county grantees, and then existing tribal grantees. So we had talked about, you know, not only their spending, but the characteristics that they share, their diversionary efforts, which is something that we're, you know, capturing in REDCap these days, as well also in narrative form over the past couple of years. You know, maybe the clients served, although a big caveat with that is, you know, that gets to the dollar per head conversation, and that can be difficult to navigate with programs that are just so incredibly different. So those are some things that we could look at. Overall, like adherence to goals, the original goals of impacts, and then some iteration of those for the tribal programs as well. And then, yeah, thinking about how do we compare an original grantee to a newer grantee as part of that. Like, we can't, to Stacy's comment, you know, these people developed programs in a pandemic. They're finally getting their feet underneath of them. But that's not to say that the hiring challenges have stopped, especially in healthcare. And so even our new grantees who are rolling out programs as of, you know, July of this past year, they're experiencing hiring challenges. And the folks, even grantees that were well underway, turnover happens, and then you still have to experience those hiring challenges as you search for new folks. So all good things to think about. But, you know, I guess I'll pause for comment on that before my next bit. I'm not seeing any, but so, you know, first off, thank you for the decisions that you guys were able to make today. That will be very helpful in informing, you know, how we move forward with this grant. The data stuff, the, you know, 1.4-ish million that fully funded the REDCap efforts and technical assistance from OHSU, PSU, School of Public Health, and the 2 evaluations. The CJC will, you know, get underway with getting those contracts sorted and, make sure that, especially for CHSE's benefit, their administrative data sources are ready to hand them over data. They could start that process today if they wanted to, and they were able to get the green go button. So we're going to get those contracts going as soon as we can. And then in regard to future program funding, the GRC decided today to really hold this to existing programs only, looking at maintenance, looking at the goal of maintenance, knowing that it might not work out to fund everyone. Ken had so many great things in that motion that I'm sure we'll encapsulate once I can watch this recording back. Hi, future Casey, you're doing a great job. So I just wanted to say that in terms of next steps, I had a few things to share. First, we have a legislative report, as Alicia mentioned. It happens every year, and we are going to, be sending it out to grant review committee members around mid-December for review, and any comment. But that will be published no later than January 1st of 2024. And then these meetings, we're entering into a new funding cycle, and that involves consultation, that involves develop of an RFGP, that involves solicitation. So I wanted to set your expectation that there will likely be more than just 4 meetings in the year 2024. And we do need to pause and recalibrate on the timing and cadence of these meetings, so that GRC members are able to be present and able to do the work that you guys do, and we're so appreciative of that. So that being said, we'll have an availability poll forthcoming, some sort of doodle poll that Avery will be so kind to put together, and we probably won't be trying to schedule all of these meetings at once. We did receive feedback that was really helpful in the past, so that at least it was on your calendar. But over the last year, things come up and meetings change. So we understand that maybe just doing 2 or 3 at a time would be beneficial. So just wanted to have that be noted as coming down the pipeline for you all. And then this new business of the future funding for programs, grant staff will get to work on what this looks like, and probably following a very similar timeline to what I shared earlier in response to Liz Weber's question about what if it was a brand new RFGP. While it's not necessarily a brand new RFGP, there is a similar, evaluation process. We want to give time for people to respond. So we'll figure out what that looks like. And I greatly appreciate, your flexibility and also confidence in me to develop this mechanism through which folks will get this information together. But there will be maybe a meeting to check in, maybe a meeting to review and approve this information. That's kind of all up in the air right now, but at least we have a direction, and for that I am grateful. Are there any questions for me before we wrap up? All right. Well, thank you everyone so much for taking the time today to talk about all this big stuff. These decisions, involve a lot of money, but they also affect a lot of people's lives. And I just want to say thank you for the time and attention that you give these efforts. I know I appreciate it. I know my team appreciates it. And that just trickles down to the entire state. So thank you.
Thank you, Casey.
Yeah, great job, Casey, to your future self. Great job.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Yep.
Take care.